Hello, everybody. Happy Friday. We have reached the end of our Get Real with AI Governance Week. We actually concluded our last letter, Legible, yesterday on Thursday. So I sort of wanted to round out the week with some Q&A, maybe some observations, just kind of go on the fly here with, kind of some thinking about the implications of what the Get Real with AI governance really means for organizations. So if you have questions, feel free to put those in the chat at any time or in the comments if you're on LinkedIn. And then in the interim, I'm going to just kind of riff on some of the questions that I have received just kind of in doing the work that I do and in thinking a little bit more about where I anticipate you will have ideas and questions to offer, and I will try to address those. So just as a little bit of a reminder of what we've been doing here this week, I have been going through the Get Real method that I developed. I'm Jill Hines. I am your friendly AI strategist. I founded a company called Groundspring, and I help organizations with these kinds of governance and responsible AI implementation questions. So to recap our letters on Monday, we talked about getting rooted, which is all about understanding your ground truth, doing that sort of foundational research to understand the context you're operating in, your end users, your stakeholders, your folks with their fingers on the keyboard, doing the day-to-day work to make sure that our AI strategy has some resemblance to what's happening in reality. And though I feel funny saying that out loud, we are in a moment of hype where I think it is merited. I think we can see there's just so much optimism around the potential for AI, and we're definitely seeing glimmers of that. At the same time, those expectations sometimes get a little disconnected from the real problems that people face, the real questions that people who are on the front lines are contending with. And when that happens, AI fails to land, the governance fails to land. There's just these gaps and disconnects. And the whole point of being rooted is to anticipate those, kind of like we are thinking through a design problem, and proactively address them. So if you don't ask, you don't know. And that's what you're doing in Rooted, is asking the questions. Then we talked about on Tuesday, we talked about being embedded. This is concerning building your governance inside real systems. Those systems can be technical systems and they can be people systems. We would be remiss to neglect either one of those. I was just looking at an IBM report that I think maybe I'll talk about in a minute or two, that, a little bit self-servingly, but it did find that having automated governance checks was producing positive results for organizations. So definitely there is a technical component to all of this. When we define boundaries and guardrails and triggers and controls, we want to build those into the systems, of course, but it's not just about the systems. You can have an eval flagged for any number of reasons, going outside of the bounds, returning a result that was unexpected. But if you don't know what to do with it or why that's actually a problem, I would argue you don't have good governance in place. There's not a shared culture around what it is that we deem acceptable, unacceptable, and it's not really part of the culture such that we can readily take action on that. And so, we don't want to over-index on one in favor of the other. We want to find that kind of balance and recognize in AI work, we are dealing with socio-technical concerns, not just technical, not just organizational. They're both. So that was embedded. And then we on Wednesday talked about actionable, which is kind of a nice a segue when I was talking about, looking at your telemetry and determining whether or not something was in or out of bounds. Actionable is really how people can act in the moment. Do you have those clear risk tiers? Do each of those tiers have named people that you can go to when you have a question, and then you can get those resolved? We don't want to expend more resources than are appropriate on maybe our lower risk tiers and those use cases associated with that. but we also want to be very clear about what is a medium or higher risk category and have a process for resolving those questions and concerns. Then we talked yesterday about legible. Legible, as I said, is not about handwriting. Maybe it could be. That's a separate talk. But what I'm talking about is the kind of legibility where your employees, your customers, regulators, the public can readily understand what it is that you are doing with your AI. They are proper, in the case of your employees, they're properly trained to carry out their responsibilities to ensure that AI is staying on track. Your regulators and customers understand your approach, your rationale, how your value system is actually kind of expressed in the work that you're doing, and that you as an organization can also institute feedback mechanisms. So you are feeding your learnings as you're deploying AI back into the organization, both from a technical and organizational perspective, so that you can continuously improve. So that's about the legibility. Like, can we really understand it? So that was the real overview. And then today I thought we could talk about questions that you might have. I know it's hard for folks to necessarily all join synchronously, so I reflected on some of the questions that I have received either being on podcasts or from clients or prospects. And so I have a little list I'm going to run through today, but as I say, please feel free to add yours to the comments as well. One question that I get a lot, and it's a reasonable question, but it's one that I don't know, maybe this is falls into the spicy take category here when I said we were going to do Q&A with a little bit of spice. I get questions about sort of speed to market, maintaining pace, getting things shipped. And there is a perception that this real framework and some of the work that it entails around doing the rooted research or talking to customers or getting your stakeholders on board, like all of that does take some time. And there is concern and question around, how do we implement these things and not slow ourselves down to, a grinding halt? So some questions might look like, I'm under pressure to show progress to the board in 90 days. How do I make the case we need to slow down and ground ourselves before we start building governance is one question you might hear. Another, governance, shouldn't feel like a speed bump, but what do I actually need to do before I ship an AI powered feature to customers? What's sort of the MVP or the minimum viable version of this that we can move forward with, again, and kind of without slowing down. So just a couple thoughts on that topic. First of all, I don't see building things correctly as and properly as slowing down. I feel like it's doing the work, right? The work is that we have obligations morally, legally, to deploy systems that we can be proud of, that reflect the value proposition that we bring to the market, that respect our customers. These are just kind of foundational, I suppose, beliefs that I have. I know a lot of organizations share those too. It just gets messy when we're under these different kinds of pressures to move forward. But kind of grounding your use cases is, in some cases, if you're following, say, ISO, doing like an algorithmic impact assessment is a requirement there, where you are supposed to like define what it is a system is going to be doing, who it's impacting, what the potential negative impacts could be. That's just proper, standards of doing good work. It's not extra, I suppose, is what I'm trying to say. It would be akin to saying, we, need to build a bridge, and we have to get it out in, 30 days. We have to construct this bridge, but we don't really have time to, get the foundations or do the surveying or the engineering that we need to do because we got to get this out in 30 days. So we're just going to put up a bridge, right? It's like, I don't want to drive over that. I don't want to walk over that. It's part and parcel of doing this kind of work. And maybe we have a perception that software is somehow different, but it's not. There are real consequences. I don't think I need to remind a lot of the folks listening to this, but there are real consequences to building software that is incomplete, doesn't have guardrails, doesn't have controls, is not accountable. And I was just reading, as I do every day, I have alerts set up for anything related to like legal, regulatory developments, use cases around AI that have caused harm. There's plenty of good, but there's harm. And one of the stories that you may have seen, because it's been widely reported in the news, is around a gentleman who was wrongly identified as soliciting a minor in Florida. The Florida Police Department, or a police department in Florida, I don't know which municipality, has admitted to this failure, and it was due to a facial recognition system that was very flawed in a number of ways. One big miss was the quality of the video that was being analyzed, and it mismatched it to this person. And you can just imagine how devastating is that as an individual being affected by the assertion or the accusation that you solicited a minor, when in fact this person didn't even live near the area where it happened. There was a lot of misses in this whole system. But that's a real worst case scenario. It's happening today. And you may not be doing facial recognition work. You might not be deploying those systems, but it is incumbent upon us to look at the potential worst case scenarios and do our darned best to prevent the worst from happening. So when we talk about speed and the agility and doing this, sometimes it is not as time consuming as you might think. If you have done the necessary, I mean, really fundamental work of determining what's a high risk and a low risk scenario, you've talked to your stakeholders about it, and you have a sense of that, you can focus on those higher risk areas and get feedback as you're building, as you're going. I think it's a mistake to think about governance in the abstract. I think it's much more powerful if you have a use case, if you have a technical stack that you're considering. You know who your end users are going to be and your stakeholders and the people building it. You can talk to them. Spend, half an hour with, a handful of people will get you much further than if you didn't talk to anyone at all in the name of, we have to get this out fast. You will pay back the steps that you miss in the beginning, and they may be in very dramatic ways. They may be in very brand killing ways, to be honest, brand defeating ways, and you don't want to do that. Anyway, it's worth the investment. It's an investment, but it's at the place in the delivery system that is, or the delivery process, that's the best time to do it. Early on, be proactive, just ask some good questions. This is not like necessarily months and months of work. It can be iterative. You will learn as you go and test and continue to talk to people. But do make the investment. It's really important for your business, the lives of all of us who are using these systems. Okay, so that's my take on speed. Let's see what other questions are here. Let's see. Yeah, so, a little bit of a question about, I use the example in one of my previous talks around implementing a guardrail. In this case, we don't want people putting personally identifiable information in a system. And there are some systems that will automatically strip that information out when one attempts to enter it into a system. And so there you've created some kind of enforcement, some kind of control before that even becomes an issue in your system. So is this more of a question of engineering, or is this more of a question about being thoughtful about your process? And I would say it's a bit of both. Governance is a cross-functional exercise. No one person has all of the answers in a full enough kind of perspective on the salient issues to operate fully independently. One of the things I've observed, and I actually get really excited about when I think about new ways of approaching governance, is how can we work together across departmental lines, across areas of expertise, to help one another understand and anticipate issues that might arise as the technology is just like moving ahead so quickly. It's actually sort of demanding that we have conversations like between legal and the business, or between engineers and HR. Like it's a really interesting and I think kind of rich opportunity to break down silos, to expand our learning. And so I'm actually quite excited about that. So what I do think is important, though, even in the example of stripping out PII, that maybe that'll be out of the box in a lot of your systems. But if we use that example, I think what it helps us understand is that we have some kind of a value, or we have some kind of a mandate that we then need to carry through into our systems. It could be PII, it could be something else around equitable outcomes, or it could be something that is a little bit more qualitative. And those merit conversations with the folks in delivery who have to operationalize that, who have to translate that ideal state into a not necessarily a binary, but something that's programmable, monitorable, and something that we can, at the end of the day, kind of evaluate, observe, and then adjust as we need. And I think that gets us closer to a place where we are living those values, and that's just a whole team effort, all up and down the chain. And so hopefully we will organize our practices and behaviors accordingly. If you're super interested in this topic, and even if you're watching it async, you can watch the recording of this. But coming up at 12:30 p.m. Eastern time today, it's Friday, June 12th, I will be doing a Responsible Tech Talk episode with a good friend of mine who has a PhD in sociology, who thinks very deeply about the organizational implications of AI-driven change. And we are specifically going to talk about some of these questions of how you can kind of make your organization a little bit more nimble. I think that the moment really demands that our governance keep pace. Ooh, and on that note, I saw a statistic that was quite notable. There's a number of these statistics out there if you go looking for them, as I do. But this one was a report from IBM, which, yes, I have looked at, but the quote from the article notes that more than 3/4 of enterprise technology leaders said AI adoption is outpacing governance capabilities. That kind of tension is really concerning. That should concern all of us. It means we are shipping faster than we can really deal with the implications, and people are going to get harmed in that scenario. They just will. They have. They are. I mean, I just shared an example. So I don't know what we are going to see from a legal standpoint. I am not a lawyer. Lawyers are among the folks I get excited about working with when we do these governance engagements. But I can only imagine that this question of who's liable is going to continue to evolve. We're seeing it. I think I just saw a report a friend of mine shared with me about a judgment in Germany saying that Google was actually accountable for its AI summary results, that was like actually a product of Google. It wasn't just presenting like someone else's webpage. It was actually its own content. And therefore there was some liability there on their part. And a while back, I think Air Canada, similarly, there was a judgment against Air Canada because a customer got erroneous information from a chatbot about their bereavement policy. And the airline tried to claim, well, that wasn't us, that was our chatbot. But the court said, no, those are one and the same. You're accountable for what you say in your chatbot. Even if you personally or the company didn't generate it, it's still your product. So we'll see how that pans out in the US. I just suspect strongly, or I would be very concerned as a product owner, a business owner, about that question of liability. And I would much rather sort of do the due diligence up front, as we talked about, and try to do, assume that I'm accountable, right? So yes, that is that. And the last question I think that I will throw out there of my own making that I have heard is, I have framed this as a design problem, this disconnect between governance and how people do or do not adopt it. And then there's the question of what does it actually look like to be successful? How do you know your governance is working? This is a really good question. I'm going to think about it a little bit more ongoing. I think that it might be, I wouldn't say a moving target, but I think it's a nuanced target. And I want to, just think about the kind of indicators here. I think that there are some kind of leading and lagging indicators. I think in the shorter term, the things I would be looking for are, do we actually have systems in place to and these are kind of yes, no questions. Do we have our risk tiers defined? Are there people who are accountable? Are there ways to communicate when there are issues? Do we have monitoring in place? I mean, there's some just like fundamental, maybe infrastructure that could signal, okay, well, we're tracking in the right direction. I also think one of the indicators of friction that I talk a lot about is when people have questions that they are struggling with, maybe they are not comfortable sharing those broadly or getting them resolved, but they nevertheless exist and they're kind of stymieing work. So do we see indicators that those questions are diminishing? A little hard if people aren't expressing them, but I think that if people also feel confident that they know what to do if they were to have an issue. So there's an instance where you could be surveying folks and figuring that information out if you wanted to do that. So those are some near-term things. I think certainly in the longer term, this is a case where you can be reflecting on the outputs of your AI initiatives, your pilots, your implementations, and you can monitor what it's doing in the wild and ask yourself, is this something that we would be comfortable if it wound up on the homepage of like a major news outlet or something like that. So if not, then that's a signal maybe there are some gaps in the decision making and we need to go back and kind of revisit controls or those kinds of things. But that's certainly a longer term indicator as well. I think general confidence from your stakeholders that you are doing the right thing, that they're finding metrics for trust might be, that's probably a little bit tricky, but trust is a big deal. When we have systems that are trustworthy, people will, engage with them more fully because we aren't stopped by this nagging doubt that, oh, I don't know where my information is going. I don't know who to talk to if I have a problem. I don't want to get stuck talking on an endless loop to a chat bot, which, gosh, happens more and more. So, those are just some thoughts. I would love to hear what you think. If you measure in any way metrics that would align with a governance effort, and you could propose those metrics as ones that we could watch ongoing. That would be interesting to know. Also, if you've seen some success stories and you want to share those, I'd love to hear them. But that is all that I have for today in the Q&A. So I didn't see anything in the chat, but at any time, if you want to reach me, I can be found on LinkedIn, of course, and at groundspring.ai. You are welcome to message me. I also do 30-minute free consultations if you want to have a conversation just like this. Happy to do it. And I'm going to leave it here for today, but join me in just a few minutes. I am going to be on Responsible Tech Talks, and we will be talking to Claire Myers, and it's going to be a lot of fun. So take care. Have a good weekend. Thanks for joining.